It always starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Hitler wanted to launch a war to destroy the Jews, and 50 million people were murdered. And not all of them Jews, far from it. This is what people have to understand. The Jews are like the canaries in the coal mine. They're the first victims. And if they go after us, be sure that they'll go after the Christians in Europe and everywhere else, because their dream is to take over the world. That's the problem.
This is a Visegrad 24 series about the Israel-Hamas war.
I'm Stefan Tompson. We're here on the ground in Israel, in Tel Aviv, interviewing a number of people, and my guest today is Efraim Zuroff, the head of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Jerusalem. Efraim, welcome.
Thank you.
My first question to you is in your long years of work as a Holocaust researcher and as a Nazi hunter, you're known as the last Nazi hunter, how central is the Holocaust to Israeli and Jewish identity?
I think it plays a very major role. Initially, that wasn't the case when Israel was founded, because we were busy trying to obtain independence and absorb more people that are actually living in Palestine than the number of Jews in Palestine at the time. But as time went by and things calmed down, we established ourselves. We could turn to the past and start examining it, because it is affected, I wouldn't say every home in Israel, but almost every home in Israel. And it's a major issue in terms of the identity of Jews in Israel, and not only in Israel.
When you look at Israel today and you're walking around the streets, you see people carrying weapons, you see a strong military, you see a fairly militarized state, you see a people who are anything but weak. There is an interesting element of the sort of the Holocaust being an event in which sort of 6 million people were helplessly led to their deaths without being able to fight back or push back in any sort of military way. How does that impact this myth of a certain, I don't know if the word weakness is the right term for it, but how does that play into the identity of?
Well, that was one of the fictions about the Holocaust. The early Israeli governments wanted to break that myth. And as a matter of fact, if you look at what Yad Vashem, the Israeli National Memorial, does, they've devoted initially almost all their efforts were directed to trying to discover whether or not there was any armed resistance by Jews during the Holocaust. They did fine things. In other words, there were revolts in 3 death camps, in Sobibor, in Treblinka, and in Auschwitz. And 1.5 million Jews fought in the Red Army. And 1 million Jews fought in the Allied armies, and there were also partisans and ghetto fighters. But the overwhelming that wasn't enough to save people, really. In other words, some people were saved in that way, but not many numerically.
So you've dedicated your life since for many decades. I mean, Simon Wiesenthal started the center, started hunting German Nazis and Nazi criminals. How important is it to seek justice now that the war is over for?
The question is, what justice is possible? The people, the last 8 trials that we were involved in Germany, the people were well into the 90s. And in German law, if you appeal a verdict, you don't go to jail until the appeal is done. Not a single person has gone to jail. 1 trial was stopped for medical reasons, but the other 7 who were convicted, not a single one sat 1 day in jail.
What's the point?
What's the point? You'd be surprised. It's a real lesson. We got some great verdicts from German judges about the role played by what you could say people who consider themselves small cogs. And in particular, there was the trial of Bruno Day, who was a watchtower guard in Stutthof. And Anne Meyer Goring, the judge, wrote a brilliant, absolutely brilliant verdict, basically saying there's no such thing as a small cog. Any person who was in a camp like Stutthof or a camp like the death camps was a participant in the goal of these camps, which was to mass murder innocent people, mostly Jews, but not only Jews.
You feel there's a great sort of sense of unfairness in how few people saw justice. We're talking about presumably the estimates that I've seen from the center itself was that there were 200,000 criminals, 140,000 of them saw trial between 1945 and 2000.
I think you're talking about the figures on West Germany.
Oh, the figures of West Germany, sorry.
In 1949, West Germany assumed responsibility for the judicial system. 200,000 investigations, 120,000 indictments, and less than 7,000 convictions.
So less than 7,000 people.
Of 200,000 investigations.
And the investigations probably didn't even cover all the people involved.
Right.
So, in fact, there was really no justice for World.
The Germans did everything possible to limit the number of people they would bring to justice and punish.
And why would they do that?
Why? Because that's what the population wanted. The population didn't want to face its past. Honestly, that is.
What do you think is the lesson from the fact that most Germans got away with?
Listen, I have to say something that is quite problematic, and that is, in my opinion, conventional justice can't deal with a tragedy the scope of the Holocaust.
So, what would the way to get justice be?
So that's the question. You may have to undertake certain procedures which may not be, or may not afford the defendants all the opportunities that they deserve. But I mean, you can't handle this. This is way beyond the capacity of any country. If a country like Germany can't do it, we think a country like Lithuania can do it, a country like Estonia, a country like Croatia, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, etc. Not a chance.
How many living Nazi criminals does the center estimate?
So we don't really know. I would estimate at least several hundred, but there's only one trial still awaiting in Hanau, near Frankfurt, of a guard in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin. But the problem is that he recently was taken to the hospital, so we're not sure about his health. I'm the only Jew in the world who prays for the good health of Nazis, you understand?
And that's it. And after that, what happens?
We go on to prosecuting Hamas people, I suppose. So but that's what Israel's going to do. In other words, we know that the investigative arm of the Israeli police are working very hard on the crimes of October 7th. This is very encouraging, and there's political will. You understand? One of the things that I learned from 40 years, or more than 40 years of trying to prosecute Nazis, is without political will, you won't get anywhere.
The Israeli PR machine has been referring to October 7th as the worst crime committed on Jews since World War II, which it is. It is
the worst tragedy and the highest number of victims, of Jewish victims. They weren't all Jews, by the way. I mean, there were Thai workers, there were other people, Filipinos, but the largest number of Jews who were murdered since the Holocaust. And the weirdest thing was that for a whole month before October 7th, they were writing in the media in Israel about the screw-ups of the Yom Kippur War 50 years previously, because it was the 50th anniversary of Yom Kippur. What happens? They make the same mistakes or some similar mistakes, which allowed that tragedy to take place. So it's very shocking. It really, I think, it was a wake-up call, so to speak. In other words, basically, you can't negotiate with people like Hamas.
And how do you think? You obviously you live in Israel. I mean, you're an American.
One second, 50 years in Israel doesn't make me Israeli?
I guess it does. But I mean, you're still an American Israeli, right?
All right, yeah. Okay.
Or not. I don't know.
I hope not. I hope not. I've lived in Israel far more years than I ever lived in America.
Is there a case here to be made that that Hamas, but also other Islamist organizations who have as their core targets Jews, and then later on the rest of the world, because obviously the Hamas doesn't just hate Jews, they're also not particularly fond of Europeans, not particularly fond of
No, it always starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Hitler wanted to launch a war to destroy the Jews, and 50 million people were murdered. And not all of them Jews, far from it. This is what people have to understand. The Jews are like the canaries in the coal mine. They're the first victims. And if they go after us, be sure that they'll go after the Christians in Europe and everywhere else because their dream is to take over the world. That's the problem.
Do you think that this is being sufficiently understood in the West, that the West understands that this is what Israel is dealing with?
It's hard to say, because when you say understand, basically that means you are ready to take the steps to very harsh steps against Islamists and to ban immigration to Western Europe and to America. And I don't know if that's possible. I would hope that it is. But to admit Islamists into any Western civilization country is like asking to commit suicide.
There's a bit of a stereotype. The Jewish organizations in Western countries are often involved in social justice activism. In quite often, the more prominent ones, or the more famous ones, like the ADL, are quite left-wing organizations. Or George Soros, for example, is become...
He's not a Jewish organization. He's a Jewish pain in the ass.
A lot of these organizations, these prominent ones and activists like George Soros, are very keen on open borders and keen on mass migration to Europe.
It's the biggest mistake they could ever make.
Can you tell us more about that?
Because listen, what's happening, and we're seeing it very clearly, have millions of Muslims running away from their home countries because of oppression, because of war, because of poverty, and they come to Western countries. They don't integrate, or they don't, what do you call it?
Assimilate.
There's another word for it. In other words, they internalize. They don't internalize the values of Western countries. But what they do what they do take on is the methods of protest. That's why you see them in the streets of Berlin, in the streets of London, in the streets of Paris, and huge numbers who talk in the name of freedom, in the name of freedom of speech, and all of this. So it's total bullshit. They're basically expressing support for a bunch of people who are genocidists. Are those the values of Western civilization? Of course not.
No, we would hope not.
We would hope not.
If not.
We're in a world where a lot of things have gone wrong now, at the moment. All this woke stuff, okay, has turned everything topsy-turvy. Perpetrators become victims. Victims become perpetrators. An institution that was found in the wake of the Holocaust to ensure world peace is turned into a forum for bashing Israel. I'm talking about the UN, of course, or the UN Human Rights Council. I think Sudan is the president now, or one of these countries where there's no human rights, whatever. I mean, it's absurd. It's totally absurd. No, everything is off kilter, and until it gets back on kilter, we're in big trouble, and the Western world civilization is in big trouble.